Ladies and gentlemen, this is Gaming Telecom video. We're going to be talking about the PlayStation 4K, also known as the Neo. I think it's fair to say that going into E3 2016, there was a buzz in the air. Everyone was expecting big things, whether it was the new consoles being announced, whether it was the tangible excitement regarding the games that we may see. E3 2016 was probably one of the most exciting in memory, certainly almost living up to the hype of the 2013 conference. But obviously the PS4K was not shown off, and Andrew House has given some reasoning behind to the Guardian. He said that the point of confirming the existence of the PlayStation 4 Neo and the bare bones of the plan last week was not to disappoint the fan base, who had obviously come to the E3 conference with high expectations of all sorts of announcements. From past experience, the worst thing you can do is disappoint and pull the rug away from people. And that's why we went out last week and said, yes, it does exist, but don't expect to see it at E3. I think that was the right thing to do, end quote. For those unfamiliar with the specifications of the PS4K, I imagine most of you are, but I'm going to give a very brief synopsis. It's essentially very much the same architecture, but just on steroids. So the CPU has a pretty big upclock. It's running at 2.1 GHz rather than 1.6. The GPU is putting out about 4.2 teraflops of performance compared to 1.84, and memory clock speeds also increased, leading to a higher amount of memory bandwidth. But why is the system being created? And there are a lot of reasons that we could start speculating. For example, the fact that we're going to get better VR experiences, the fact that Microsoft are really pushing PC gaming. But according to Andrew House, yes, PC gaming is one of the big reasons. We did think there was an opportunity to reflect the traditional life cycle and on 4K technology, and say maybe there's an opportunity within the course of a normal life cycle to offer something else, something a little bit better, for a segment of the market that feels that this is important. He, by the way, is referring to high-end graphics here. We've traditionally seen that some of the core audience tends to gravitate back to high-end PCs at some point, because those are the people who want the finest graphical performance. So here's a great opportunity to stay within our ecosystem. If you're a person who just purchased a 4K television, maybe there's not something that much content around right now, so there's something interesting about games being able to fill in that gap and offer that experience. Those are the fundamentals of the Neo, end quote. When you start thinking about it, what he says makes an awful lot of sense, especially if you've been about the block for a while. For example, back when I first got my hands on a PlayStation, the 3DFX Voodoo 2 very much managed to keep up with the original PlayStation to a degree, but then the PlayStation 2 just blew away the Voodoo cards, and it took a while for PC to start catching up. But when it did, I started to play more on my PC, just because a lot of the games were on both consoles, but of course I did use my console for the exclusives. Same thing for the Xbox 360 and PS3 generation. At the start, the PS3 and Xbox 360 did a fine job. They managed to keep up fairly well. For example, Oblivion looked pretty damn good on the Xbox 360, but over time, after a couple of years, the PC started to really move forward, and obviously that generation was so lengthy that by the end of it, games were often running sub 720p, and you could start really noticing that on high-end, large-screen 1080p televisions, let alone the 4K televisions that we're starting to get now. I said a while back that Microsoft, in a way, are in a better position than Sony with one key reasoning, and that is, it doesn't really matter to Microsoft if you buy into PC or you buy into the Xbox. They're benefiting either way. You are in that ecosystem. One can argue that their move into PC is not great for PC gaming, ironically, because it starts locking us down, in theory, and this is the worst case scenario, it starts locking us down to a very Xbox-like ecosystem, and we don't necessarily want that on PC, which is one of the reasons personally I'm advocating Vulkan, but that's a different argument. But with the PlayStation 4K, it doesn't have the level of performance of a high-end PC. It just doesn't. We all know that. it's putting out about 4 T-flops, and a T-flop isn't necessarily the best indicator of performance, but it's a pretty darn fine one, especially using very similar architecture. And even if you say that PCs are not as efficient, and so the consoles maybe would be equivalent of a, let's say, a 5 T-flop GPU, just for sake of argument, it's still going to be behind where a PC is. It's still going to be behind, for example, the RX 480 when it's released by quite some margin, and that is only about $200 for a GPU. But this does manage to appeal to a certain demographic. It appeals to people who don't necessarily want the hassle of having multiple systems, that people who just want to keep in one ecosystem. And for PC gamers or people who have multiple systems, maybe they won't be that interested in the Neo, because maybe they just want the PlayStation 4 for, let's say, the exclusives. And real graphic lovers, and it's certainly a good possibility that real graphic lovers will buy the Neo anyway, because they want, once again, the best graphics, but they will only use that for the exclusives. For the regular graphics lovers, they might not be that fussed about buying an entire new system when maybe all they want to do is play The Last of Us 2 and Uncharted. Who knows? We don't know how it's going to go down. But I think it is smart of Sony to offer these choices. Now, my personal opinion on this, because I keep being asked, do I think it's a good idea? And honestly, I keep flip-flopping. And I know that's a really shitty thing for me to do as someone who's giving their opinion, but it's really hard for me to say, yes, it's a good idea, or no, it's not a good idea. Really, there are too many variables. I think Sony have it down more in terms of how it's going to work. But, and by which I mean the fact that, you know, there can't be Neo exclusives, they have to run at a certain X and Y, but I think the problem is, I don't have a problem against the idea of an upgraded system. My concern is whether the market embraces it. In theory, it's a good idea, but my concerns are whether we start getting half-assed versions of a game for either the Neo, for example, or for the vanilla system, because they either can't be asked to put the work into the Neo version, or they can't be asked to put the work into optimizing the vanilla version. Now, obviously that does really depend upon the quality control. It depends on whether developers are going to do that, because ultimately if they want the best version of the game across multiple formats, let's face it, if you're putting out a game and it doesn't run well on the vanilla, for example, it's going to spread around like wildfire, and people are going to know that stuff. There's a reason that certain developers are very criticised in PC gaming, for example. Ultimately, I think this is the best move Sony could have done, because PC gaming is becoming really big right now. And they must have known, because they're working very closely with AMD, they're working very closely with companies, that PC gaming GPUs are going to become a lot cheaper to run the equivalent of the PS4. For example, the RX 480, and this is of the time I'm recording, which is June 16th, so maybe if you're watching this in, let's say, 2 weeks' time, you'll know differently. But at the time I'm recording, the RX 480 supposedly is going to put out about the performance of the Nano, the Fury Nano. Now, the Nano can run 4K games, but it's very comfortable doing 1440p. It basically ravages 1440p. The reason I bring that up is because for $200-ish, you can have a kick-ass GPU. Then you could go out, you could buy something along the lines of a 2500K, a 2600K from eBay. You could buy an FX 8350 from eBay, or new if you so desire. You could partner that up with quite a cheap motherboard, because motherboards, unless you're getting one that's got all the belts and whistles, you can get one for like $30 to $50, especially off eBay. You could pick up some 8GB or 16GB of DDR3 memory. It's really cheap at this point. DDR3 memory is at an all-time low, and you can have a system for, let's say, the processor cost you, I'm using eBay prices, let's say $70 for the CPU, $30 for the memory, $50 for the motherboard, let's say $150 plus the motherboard, plus the CPU, plus the GPU if I can get the sodding words out. So you're looking at maybe $350 plus the power supply and SSD if you don't have one. So maybe like $500 at worst, and that's assuming you can't reuse any components. That's assuming you can't reuse the case. That's assuming you can't reuse a CPU, or you can't beg, borrow, or steal a motherboard from someone, or reuse DDR3 memory when it's so common. Now, I'm not trying to say that PC is better than PlayStation. I'm just saying that I can definitely understand the motivations of Andrew House in that it's very tempting now for people to buy a PC. And I say this from the perspective of people who are messaging me all the time. Like, seriously, my Facebook, both my personal Facebook and RGT Facebook, is blowing up recently with the amount of people who are suggesting, hey, if I buy Polaris, hey, if I buy the GTX 1070... And I love that. I love people are messaging me, but it lets me know that there's a big interest, because until these new GPUs were announced, people weren't. And really, it comes down to pricing. For example, let's say the Neo comes in, and I'm just throwing in prices here. We don't know what it's going to be really cost, but let's say the Neo is $400 to $450. Let's say $400. But you could buy a PC which outperforms it for, let's say, $450, $500. Kind of makes sense for a lot of folks to buy the PC. But then, I'm equally understanding for people who want to buy the Neo and get tied into Sony's ecosystem, because PCs do have their disadvantages. Consoles do have a lot of advantages. So I guess what I'm saying here is it's not necessarily that Sony are building a system which is going to stop high-end PC gamers, because it won't. I think what Andrew House is saying is, for those who want the better graphics, they do have a system out there. It may not outperform a high-end PC, but at least it can better compete. And I think that's a smart move from Sony, my personal opinion. But, as usual, as I've said countless times, whether it's on my Polaris videos, whether it's the Scorpio videos, whether it's any video, you are the one who makes the decision, my friends. If you want to buy the Neo, if you want to buy the Scorpio, if you want to buy a high-end PC, that is all down to you. It's your money. Just be aware, of all the pitfalls and all the benefits, and go from there. Ultimately, I think it comes down to pricing and how the manufacturers handle the titles across the original systems and the upgraded systems. One thing I will say that Sony are doing much better than Microsoft, but that could be because they're maybe further along in development or have been working out longer than Microsoft or whatever, is that they are much better at keeping message on point. And this is a point I need to stop saying point. This is something I brought up yesterday in a video of Microsoft, which would have been the 15th of June. There's a lot of confusion when it comes to Microsoft's messages at the moment. For example, you had the Coalition developers going on record, I believe it was to Polygon, and they said that the Xbox One S had an upgraded GPU and CPU. So everyone rushed out, started to put out articles, started to talk online, whether it was the NeoGAFs, Beyond 3Ds, Reddits, whatever the balls you happen to use, Facebooks, and started to talk about that. Then, a little bit later, you had folks over at Microsoft, Phil Spencer and the like, who were saying, no, that's not the case. We don't know how you're getting that information. Dudes, your own developers just told us that. So you can't be telling people, how did you get that information? Why are you making such a big deal of it when your own developers just told you, or told us, that yes, it's more powerful. So it's like, which one is it? And Scorpio, the same thing with the whole 4K situation. Scorpio is only going to do things for 4K users. Then the next minute, no, it's actually for anyone. Anyway, that's a slight aside. I'm just saying that messages are important, and I think we are going to go into this iteration with messages being the most important from the company. Why should we buy this new hardware? What's the price? What are the benefits? And go from there. Who knows, maybe we'll cover it on RGT and with the new upgraded hardware. But I'm going to get going. Hopefully you've enjoyed the video. It's been a bit of a... It was not supposed to be this long, damn it. How did it get this long? Anyway, hopefully you've enjoyed the video. I'll see you soon. Take care. Bye for now.